If you're a preacher, you know this verse already. You could recite it by heart because it's kind of like your charter, your marching orders. All right.
I'm not ashamed of the good news. It is the power God uses to save everyone who believes, to save the Jews first, and then to save the non-Jews.
All right. Thank you. So he refers to the gospel. What does the word gospel mean? Good news. Yeah. Why is it good news? The simple answer? I know I hate it when teachers ask questions like that because you're going to come up with answers that he's not looking for. But
Actually, this was really so. Yuki, our exchange student, who started joining us in the evening when we work extra time, and we will ask her like if she has any questions from her Bible class because this is all new. And she goes, "Well, I wrote an answer for good news, and does this sound right?" And she kind of talked about like the importance of Jesus and his saving, and that it brings happiness and goodness. Anyways, it was really neat to hear her try and take something she doesn't has never studied or known
yeah.
and try and answer that question of what is good news and why is it good. And so she equated it back to Jesus and
Okay. That's a
and
good
the
answer.
sharing of it.
Yeah.
And so
Anybody else got a different thought or something similar? Why is the gospel good news? And that's another one of those phrases, gospel. A lot of people, they think gospel means literally truth. And it is truth. But it's one of those words that I think probably didn't actually get translated or something. It was probably transliterated. But it literally means good news. And if you read some of the more open translations, I guess I'd call them, they will sometimes insert that phrase in place of the word gospel. But it's good news because there's some bad news, huh? There's bad news, and there's good news coming out of that background. So the bad news is basically that we are tainted goods. We're all messed up. Even the sweetest people they're messed up. It's embarrassing, but it's true. Um, at our core, we're all pretty selfish and self-serving. That is kind of our nature. Uh, and we all want to be in charge. We want to be in charge of ourselves. We sometimes want to be in charge of others. Uh, if we could rule the world, we might. Basically, what I'm trying to say is we all kind of want to be God. That's another way to think of it. Um, and isn't that kind of what you know Satan put into Eve's heart and what Adam bought into? He said, God's just trying to hide something from you, and you can be just like him if you just buy in and eat that fruit. You'll have the knowledge of good and evil, and then you'll be just like God. And that temptation is what created the fall of man, and it is what perpetuates uh, people that are lost in their condition. These are my opinions, by the way. Okay, so I could be wrong. Maybe I didn't. I should have said that up front. I used to say this at every time I had an opportunity to teach. I am just a man, and I can be wrong for sure. And if you hear me say something that you disagree with, it's okay to do that. And ultimately, I'll listen to Scripture, even if you're wrong. I'll listen to Scripture. No, in any case, and I will listen to reason. So it's not like I'm some kind of Bible scholar or authority. I put these lessons together one at a time. And if you ask me to repeat some of the stuff I teach here on the street, I'd have to get my concordance out and find all these verses and things like I do when I'm preparing the lessons. But we've got this treasure in earthen vessels. Paul says that there's good news. God's word through Paul, a frail earthen vessel, says that there's good news. And he is not ashamed to admit that. and we're all hopelessly lost. All, as of Google uh, yesterday, there's 8.2 billion of us on this planet, and we're all hopelessly lost. And that is embarrassing, but I'm not ashamed to admit the fact that my default modus operandi is selfishness. I admit that, but there's a cure for it, and I'm not ashamed to admit that uh, that I need the cure. And that's kind of the way evangelism works. If Lou was here right now, he'd be saying amens, because he's all about telling his story. And honestly, sometimes it wears on me, but because he likes to repeat it over and over. But he's right. You got to figure out some way to make the gospel real to the people around you. And sometimes it involves telling your story. We'll get to that though. So, the average hopelessly lost human being, to them, this sounds too simple. Imagine yourself telling someone, you know what, you're lost and you're headed down the wrong track, but all you got to do is believe in Jesus. And it just sounds like, and then all your problems, they're not going to go away, but as far as God's concerned, the slate will be wiped clean. And I know that there's more to it than that. We don't just believe in Jesus, we commit ourselves to following him, correct? When we obey the gospel. And one of the first things a Christian should do, or a person should do, I should say, in following Jesus is get baptized. And we're not here to really talk about that this morning, but there's a whole lot of good reasons to get baptized. And they're more about what's going on inside of you than they are about the water and, the witnesses and all of that. You have to reach a certain state of mind before you're actually really ready to commit yourself to baptism. And what you're saying in that act is that you believe in the I can't even say it word, efficacy. There we go. I said it once, of Christ's sacrifice on the cross, and that you're willing to follow him from this day forward. And you're committing yourself to that when you get baptized. So, and again, we're not really here to study that. We have lots of verses that talk about baptism. And by the way, on that subject, one day somebody put into my hands a copy of a Young's concordance. As a new Christian, I didn't even know such a thing existed. And when I saw this thing, I thought, this is incredible. They've even gone so far as to register in that book how many times the word "the" is used. I mean, that is truly exhaustive. And I don't know that you'd ever use that feature, but it's kind of cool to know that every single word in the Bible is registered in these concordances, hence the term exhaustive. And if they did that with the word "the," they probably did it with other more important topics also. And of course, in a concordance, you can find all the verses that relate to baptism. And if you have the time to go through and look them all up and study them, you will come to an understanding of the subject of baptism. Anybody can do this. It's not, you don't have to be a theologian. Am I holding this thing too far away? Okay. All right. I have it in my hand because I want to share it with other people when you make comments and things like that. Thought I'd try that today. Okay, so it sounds too simple to be true, and too good to be true, rather, but it is. The gospel is the only power in this world that changes hearts. It's the only cure for selfishness. And when you make that commitment to accept Jesus' offer and follow him, to take up your cross and follow him, it begins there. When you trust Jesus, your heart will change, your world will change, and it continues by simply following him, not your own selfish intuition, and not by following some man made creed. It all centers around a person, not AI, a person, and his name is Jesus. A real historical person, by the way, and that's another topic altogether. So anybody in here ever read a book called In His Steps by Charles Sheldon? old book. It's out of copyright. It's, you can reproduce it and stuff like that. Uh, but it's basically a story about people who agree to follow Jesus and how it changes them. Is that a story that you can tell? Do you agree, that Jesus is the Savior? Do you agree that He's changed your life? And if you haven't thought about this, you should be able to tell people how He's changed your life. And it doesn't have to be in theological terms. It can be really simple, like, you know what? I used to drink too much, and now I don't because I found something better. And let me tell you about Him. Yeah. So if you can tell that story, your story, and you can point people to the story of Jesus, then you're just like Paul. You're not ashamed of the gospel. You're not ashamed of the good news. And you can do personal evangelism. We give that a title, but that makes it scary, I think. Really, what we're talking about is sharing what you know. Let me ask you this. When you find something amazing, for me, sometimes it's a waterfall or something like that, or you find some product that you didn't even know existed and it works, and it's awesome, right? Doesn't that make you want to do like a Facebook post or call your wife or your husband or call a friend and go, "You are not going to believe this." You want to share that. You get excited about it. Excuse me for spitting. You get excited about that. And you want to tell people about it. And in the marketing world, they call that what? Word of mouth advertising, right? What better endorsement? I don't know about you. I hate salespeople coming to my front porch. I really do. Because they're so quick and they got their patter all set up and they know what they're going to say and they're ready to answer all your objections. It just makes me nervous, and it shouldn't at my age. But when I was a youngster, I really bought into some dumb stuff because of people that came to my porch. Anyways, this is not like that. We're talking about basically getting it from a friend or somebody who cares about you. Word of mouth. And I can't think of a better endorsement. And when you can tell them, I don't know about everybody else, but here's what Jesus did for me. Here's how He changed my life. It's a whole different scenario. And you know what? You're thinking, well, am I going to have to talk people into this and convince them? If you start out with something along the lines of, you know what? I'm a mess. Everybody's a mess, but I'm a mess too. And all I want to do is tell you how I got that straightened out, how I made it better. When you say to people, like Lou does all the time, I'm a mess. I was a mess. I still am, really. And then you tell them about Jesus. When you say that, those words, those kind of words, they will see themselves in your story. Because deep down inside, I think everybody knows they're a mess too. Really, if they're honest with themselves. Now, if they're not, you can't fix that, right? You just have to hope that it settles in the back of their mind, and later on when they're by themselves thinking what a mess my life is, maybe it'll speak to them at that time. But seriously, when you let people know, I'm just another beggar who found food and I want to share it with you, then they'll get the idea, and you won't have to arm wrestle them into obeying the gospel. All right. So if you're thinking people won't believe me, you're wrong. All right. For these reasons that I just stated, but also you're wrong because John 4:35, we have the words of Jesus. Somebody want to get that? John 4:35. It's real short. John 4:35. ready? All right.
Do you not say there are yet 4 months, then comes the harvest? Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white for harvest.
All right. So Jesus is saying now is the time for the harvest. He said it to these people that were in his hearing, and he's saying it to us today. Now is the time for the harvest. The fields are white. He's talking about, I think, wheat or some sort of grain. And if you've ever seen a wheat field when the grain is ready to be harvested, it looks whitish. Okay. And so the harvest is there and it's ready. But that's not going to last forever. Ecclesiastes 3:1, it says that there's a time appointed for every event under heaven. And Jesus says now is the time for the harvest. In the case of humans, James 4:14 says, "You are like the morning fog. It's here a little while and then it's gone." We only have a short while to work in the field, and the people that are in the field only have a short while also. And every day I hear some story or I see in the news where somebody passed before their time. And I've had people that I was planning on talking to about Jesus. I've had some of those people pass because I waited too long. I waited for the perfect moment. I waited for, a private time. I waited. And sometimes you don't get a second opportunity. Sometimes people like up and move without even consulting you. And you don't get to talk to them before they leave. Or sometimes they pass away. And then all you have is regret. And thank God for his grace. But you can't help but feel bad about that. If we just trust Jesus and do what he says, we will fulfill his purpose. And when you're fulfilling his purpose, you'll be doing what he created you for. There's no greater joy. Once you start doing that, you won't want to quit. You'll become a fanatic. Or you could just call yourself a fan of Jesus if you like. That's just short of being a Jesus freak, I guess, and that's acceptable. But seriously, what is there, that's more important than a person's soul? Luke 15:7 shares some insight on that. So my point in reading this verse is, if you love Jesus, you'll want what he wants. And what is Luke 15, 4-7? Somebody want to turn to that? Luke 15:4-7. Ready?
So he told them this parable. What man among you who has 100 sheep and loses one of them does not leave the 99 in the open field and go after the lost one until he finds it? When he has found it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders, and coming home, he calls his friends and neighbors together, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep." I tell you, in the same way, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who don't need repentance.
All right. There's a I guess I'd call it a group, a band, I don't know. They do like contemporary Christian music. Phillips, Craig and Dean, I think, is their name. And they have this song that almost brings me to tears every time I hear it. And it's, I think the name of the song is "That's His Favorite Song of All." Here I go. The Song of the Redeemed. And it presents this picture of the host of heaven surrounding the throne. And they're all singing praises. And then all of a sudden, God raises his hand and he says, "Hush, do you hear that? Do you hear that? Somebody out there is singing the song of the redeemed. Some lost soul has come to Christ. And he wants everybody to just be quiet because he wants to hear that song." It's a sort of dramatic presentation of what happens when a soul comes to Christ, when a soul is redeemed, a lost soul. What is Jesus talking about here when he's talking about this one sheep that gets lost and he leaves the 99? Isn't that kind of risky? Does he really not think that they're important too? Tell me what you're thinking. This is where I wait awkwardly.
I think it shows that that's how much he does love that lost sheep because he is willing to risk that.
He certainly loves the others too, doesn't he? The ones that are righteous, that are talked about here.
The evil ones are also in a safe location, right? Like
Good
he's
point.
left them
They're not in jeopardy.
in a point of the field where they aren't next to a cliff, right? They are like actually in a, now, yes, obviously something can come in and attack, right? But
Yeah.
for the most part, they're where they should be,
Yep.
right? And so, but the other one is in a much more risky of a scenario. And so to leave and go get that one is of higher importance at that point.
Yeah, the one that's in danger.
Probably got to know a little about sheep too, to understand the analogy. You know, the sheep herd together,
Yeah.
they'll stay together. But if they're lost, they won't. But you know, you get a group of sheep together, they're not going to just do like humans and scatter to the four corners. And there's studies about conference rooms. When people come into conference rooms or we're seating, they'll distribute evenly with maximum space usually, you know.
Right.
They don't all come together where sheep do that, you know. So maybe they're together, they're supporting each other. But a better analogy for the Christians that are already saved.
You know, you raise a good point in the process. I know I'm going to wander off a little bit here, but I've noticed that the same is true of the sheep in our auditorium. For some reason, they will disperse. If there's 500 chairs, they will space themselves out evenly among those 500 chairs. And that's really kind of annoying to song leaders and preachers sometimes. They would like you to move forward sometimes, and when you ask them, a lot of times they won't still. But yeah, why do they do that? But that's a whole different thing. So yeah, there is this hyperbole maybe that Jesus employs here that says, hey, this one that's in jeopardy is most important because it's in jeopardy. The others are taken care of. They're safe. They're where they belong. And it's true in this life, isn't it? I do not grieve the loss of a Christian brother or sister in the way that I grieve the loss of someone who is not a Christian. It's a whole different scenario. And I've been to funerals for both types of people. I've even actually preached at funerals for both types of people. And it's more of a celebration when it's a Christian because you know they're safe. They're not in jeopardy. You don't know about the others. You might hope, you might pray that God is in his mercy will find some way, to save that person that we don't know about or something, but it's not my place to make those kinds of decisions. And I don't tell the family of a loved one who has passed that was not a Christian, well, I'm sorry to tell you, but your loved one's in hell. I don't say those words because it's not my place. And I can't say that with authority anyways, because I don't decide who goes to heaven or hell, do I? And neither do you. But when it's somebody that you know is a faithful Christian, then there's rejoicing over that. And I've got an aunt right now, the last aunt on my father's side of the family that's about to pass. And she's a believer. And so I feel pretty good about that. I'm happy for her and I'm sad for the rest of the family, including myself. But it's a different scenario altogether. And this reminds me of the parable of I've already forgotten the name of it now, the two sons. One was prodigal, thank you, the prodigal son. And, the son that was there always was offended, wasn't he? Because he felt like, I never got a party. You never put a robe on me and a ring on my finger. And the father's response was, you're always in my thoughts. I've always loved you, and everything I have is yours. But your brother was dead, and now he's alive. That's the contrast that God has when it comes to those that are lost and those that are saved. And a great way to start a conversation with somebody, if you're talking about religion, is, you know what? I was lost. Some would say I still am, but I was lost and didn't know what to do with my life. I didn't know, where to turn. And then I encountered Jesus. Somebody took the time to talk to me about him. And did it solve all my problems and wipe away all my worries? No. But things started to get better. And here's how they got better. And I've seen that in my life. And I believe you've seen it in your lives too. I was just talking to Phil this morning, and we were talking about a verse that talks about, testing God and seeing that he's true and tasting the blessings of God and knowing that they're real. When I became a Christian, that was the approach that was used on me, and it worked. This friend of mine said, what do you got to lose, man? I mean, is your life everything you want it to be right now? And it wasn't. The circumstances sometimes sort of prime you to accept the gospel. Um, I was in my first mortgage. We had our first baby. I had this great job, and then I got laid off. That was the background for some of this. And I noticed these next door neighbors that they had something that we didn't have, and I didn't know what it was, but they seemed pretty excited about it. And I noticed that they had Bible studies in their home and things. People came and went. They seemed to have a lot of friends too, which I don't think we had a lot of friends. We had friends, but they didn't have our best interests at heart. Let's put it that way. And I was that kind of friend to some of those people. And these people seemed to love each other. And these neighbors that moved in next to us acted like they loved us. They were more concerned about us than some of our own family members, extended family. And so one day I asked them, what do you guys do? I notice every Sunday morning you go away and you have people at your house all the time. And he started to tell me about Jesus and what had, how Jesus had impacted his life. And then he said, you should try hanging out with us for a while. You should come to church. I don't mean just once or twice. Give it some time. But come for 6 months, maybe. We'll pick a number out of the air and just hang out with these crazy people that call themselves Christians and see if there's something to it. He says, and I don't believe it'll take you that long to figure out that they have something special, that we have something that's real. But just check it out. What do you got to lose? And I thought, probably nothing. Really, I mean, my prospects aren't looking great right now anyways, I was thinking. And I was more lost than I knew. I just thought I was facing financial challenges and things like that. I didn't know, that other parts of my life were worse off than my finances. And so we started going to church with them and hanging out with these people and staying afterwards for potlucks and what have you, and just getting to know them. And after about maybe 3 months, we fell in love with these people and we obeyed the gospel. And not after having a conversation, though, with somebody who took me to the Bible and verified that I understood what I was doing. And one night, after going through those scriptures, I went home and I talked to Christine. I said, you know what? I want to get baptized. And she's like, whoa, what? Where'd that come from? Because she didn't marry a Christian. She married this nut, I guess. I call myself that. this long-haired, skinny guy who was always trying to be funny. She thought I was the funniest guy in the world. She doesn't think that anymore. But she said, I don't know about this. And I said, well, let me show you. Let me show you what they showed me. And we got the Bible out and we went through it. And we talked about it for a couple of days. And I told her I was going to get baptized on Sunday. This was like earlier in the week. I don't know why I waited, but I did. That's the way they did things in that congregation. They said, well, okay, yeah, we'll baptize you on Sunday. But by the time we got to the end of the week, she's like, you know what? I think you're right. I think these verses, they're like, they're not just talking about somebody else. They're talking to us. They're talking about us. We're the ones that are supposed to get baptized. We're the ones that are supposed to be faithful and walk, in that faith. We're the ones that need to have a relationship with Jesus. And so that Sunday morning, we both went forward and we were baptized. And it changed our lives. I can look back. Now, I'm not one of these guys that could tell you what day it was or what the date was. Some people, they remember their second birthday, they call it usually, their birth into Christ. I don't remember that. It's probably on a certificate buried somewhere in our records. But I know that from that point forward, our life changed drastically. And it was really weird for our friends to start with. But all of those that are still around know that we're real about this now and we're sincere about it. Uh, Most of them are dead, truth be known. So many of them got into drugs and stuff like that and alcohol and what have you. And Christy and I were sort of on that track as well. And we're still here. And a lot of them are gone now because they abused their bodies. A fringe benefit of being a Christian is taking care of your body because it's the temple of the Holy Spirit, right? And so we need to make it presentable. And we need to be a good emissary or ambassador for Christ because that's part of our job. And part of that means taking care of yourself and taking care of, your friends and things like that, modeling the Christian life. Anyways, yeah, it was like a change. And it didn't happen overnight either, by the way. It took some time. And there were various awakenings as we matured as Christians. And they're still happening, by the way. Every once in a while, I get what do they call it when you hear the voice of God? Uh, a revelation, we'll call it that, yeah. There's another term that I can't think of right now. But every once in a while, epiphany. Every once in a while, I'll get an epiphany. And I'm like, whoa, where'd that come from? I've read that verse 50 times, and this time it means something different to me. And I latch onto that. And to me, that's part of the adventure, too. That's the beauty of being a Christian. All right. I'm all out of material. Um, if you have any comments, I'd be happy to hear
Yeah,
them.
I was just thinking about what you said, your story is, I, something that I really appreciate, but I can't connect with because I was 10 when I made that decision.
Yeah.
And so what's my story to people? Uh, but it's along the lines of I think being able from a very young age to look across your life, look back, and see decisions you made, and what were they based on? Were they based on
Yep.
selfishness, or was there some higher power? It's the key decisions you make in life, but also the daily decisions.
Yeah.
But if you can show people that, look, my relationship with Jesus has been one of care through my whole life and protection and whatnot. And then I start thinking about, well, people, what are they looking at? They're saying, well, this just happened to me. I'm a victim. All this stuff, all my life's been a disaster.
Right.
One thing or another. But you have to look back and say, how many of those were your decisions? And not putting your decision making into a realm higher power and what someone else who cares for you really wants for your life.
Yeah.
If you'd made those decisions, if you made those decisions today, how would your life change? And there's other people that have excelled or haven't had disasters or whatnot, and they live a moral life, and they're making the same types of decisions. So it kind of like uh, um, there are those examples that people throw at you to say, well,
Yeah.
but then you also say, well, the flip side is God has not guaranteed us a rose garden here either. It's still life and still stuff you have to deal with, but I don't know. I think about more of looking back and seeing your decisions and how do you start changing your trajectory by your decisions, and what's the key decision to make.
Yeah. I like to tell people that are quote unquote moral that they're following, you know, God's law. But they don't know they don't know God. It's funny. I mean, you can live a moral life. You can, live within that framework of morality. But if you don't know the lawgiver, if you don't know God, you're missing out on the best part of that.
I was going to say, I grew up in a split household where I had one side that was very religious, consistent, always went to church. And then I had the other side where we were exposed to a lot of things. And they weren't things that we necessarily chose, but they were just experiences. And like with my health stuff that I've had throughout my life, like there's several instances where it is not any choices that I have made in my life. They just have been what they are. But I will say, I got a huge blessing to be able to see two different ways of living life. And one of the greatest blessings, and I think one thing we really have to capitalize on as Christians, is that aspect of the joy aspect,
Yeah.
even within life circumstances, things that happen that are inflicted upon you. And like you said, a lot of the people that I grew up with or knew on the side that was non-religious, they are dead, or they are gone, or they got really stuck in their mental, emotional, or physical health issues. And it's not to say that the people on the other side that did not experience the same thing as far as physical health or addiction or things like that, but the way that they approached it, tackled it, the community they had around them, that's something that's very appealing to people. And so when I looked at it throughout my childhood, I knew exactly which one I wanted, because there is the community aspect that comes into play. There is the fact that you have broken people, but there's a joy to it. And I think about my most influential way of getting people to come to church and to stay is actually from uh, that idea of awful tragedy will happen, but I have a purpose and a calling and a joy and a love that's bigger than that. And
Absolutely.
so that's what I think is what really makes the good news.